Good morning.
Good morning.
We'll make this interesting this morning. Again, I'm David Freitag. I'm going to provide you with a brief presentation today on the Bay Area to Central Valley Program EIR. The purpose of this presentation is to review the entirety of this Program EIR process and to highlight the key issues that have been raised in the process over the years, and starting in 2005 on to 2012. We have technical resources here today to assist me to answer questions if you should have any, or if any topics that relate to the partially revised Program EIR come up, we're here to help answer those. The purpose of this Program EIR was from the beginning and is to this day to support the choice of what the document calls a network alternative, or overall route into the Bay Area to Central Valley, as well as individual alignments and station locations that will become part of the statewide high-speed train system. This EIR is called a Program EIR because the authority decided to use a tiered environmental process. This means that the authority has used a more general first tier or Program EIR to examine the impacts at a general level to support its very general decisions about basic routes for the high-speed train system. The board did this in 2005 for the statewide Program EIR and also for the Bay Area to Central Valley Program EIR. The Program EIR decisions involve a commitment for more study, not an approval to build anything. The authority will then use more detailed second tier or project level EIRs to examine impacts in more detail and make specific decisions about detailed alignments that will actually be proposed for construction. So this slide shows the different milestones in what has been quite a lengthy EIR process. To recap a little bit and go way back, the Bay Area to Central Valley Program process started in 2005 with the conclusion of the statewide Program EIR-EIS. The authority in 2005 decided that the Bay Area to Central Valley connection for the high-speed train system merited more focused study and decided to prepare a second Program EIR on this study area. The authority developed the Program EIR from December 2005 to July 2007, circulated a draft and for public comment, and issued a final Program EIR-EIS in May 2008. Final decisions occurred in July 2008, and a lawsuit followed. Based on the lawsuit, the authority prepared a revised draft Program EIR that was issued in March 2010, and which finalized in August of 2010. And again, more lawsuits followed. In November 2011, the court issued rulings that were not finalized until February 2012. The authority moved forward, issued a partially revised draft Program EIR just this past January, and now before you today is the partially revised final Program EIR. And you might remember this slide from the last time, but this is, at the program level, this is the broad study area shown with the hatch mark between the Bay Area and Central Valley. The Program EIR examined multiple alignments, as you can see here. It's a little hard to see, but there are multiple alignments and station location options that we studied, particularly, looking at how the project met the project objective, being close to existing rail and transportation corridors as much as feasible and possible. It's hard to see, but we wanted to revisit the multitude of options studied in the 2008 final Program EIR. This document contained 11 representative network alternatives, piecing all the little pieces together to create network alternatives. 11 of those were for the Altamont Pass, 6 of those network alternatives were for Pacheco Pass, and 4 of them were combined for both passes. We'll get to the issues at each of the stages in just a second, but before we do that, I'd like to focus on the breadth of the public participation and process that has occurred as part of the Program EIR. With each iteration of the Program EIR, the authority has received and responded to many comments. We've had over 1,000 comments on the documents to date, and a number of, commenters. We've had 1,000 commenters, and we've had almost 5,500 comments that we've responded to. Let's look back at some of the issues that were raised as part of each step in the process. So some of the key issues raised in 2007 and 2008 included people actively voicing their opinion on the northern mountain crossings, Altamont versus Pacheco. There was strong concern voiced over the biological impacts of both the major routes across the mountain ranges, including Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge for Altamont and the Grasslands Ecological Area across Pacheco. There was also strong concern voiced over growth effects for the high-speed train system. At the very end of the process, in May 2008 and again in July 2008, the Union Pacific Railroad sent letters to the authority indicating its refusal to allow any of its right-of-way to be used for the high-speed train. So this, what you're looking at here, is one of the key issues of the GEA and Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. I'd just like to point out that all of the network alternatives would have significant potential impacts on aquatic and wetland habitats and other sensitive resources. Back in 2007, in December, over at the state capitol, the authority delivered an extensive slide presentation illustrating these two areas. The program EIR analyzed the biological impacts of placing the high-speed train in each sensitive area. This issue was challenged in court and found to be compliance with CEQA. The Altamont network alternatives that would cross the bay at Dunbarton would impact open bay, salt ponds, salt marsh, mudflat, and vernal pool habitats. The network alternatives crossing at this location would result in more than 39 acres of potential direct impacts on the bay and other water bodies, and up to 46 acres of potential direct impacts on the wetlands. 33.8, almost 34 acres of that would occur directly within the bay area here. A new bay crossing would also require extensive coordination and consultation with the Army Corps of Engineers under the Rivers and Harbors Act, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the California Coastal Commission. Would involve extensive, uncertain, and time-consuming permit processes. The Grasslands Ecological Area, where the Pacheco Pass alternatives would cross through along Henry Miller Road, including a 3.3-mile elevated structure through the GEA area, similar to what this slide is showing. This would result in potential direct impacts on almost 4 acres of water bodies and almost 16 acres of wetlands. 11.5 of those acres of wetlands would be occurring along the Henry Miller Road alignment as shown here. As discussed in the 2008 final program EIR, the high-speed train would have biological impacts in both areas. The Pacheco Pass serving San Francisco via San Jose has fewer impacts on these highly sensitive resources, including wetlands and aquatic resources, and would not require a bay crossing. It's important to recall here that the Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. EPA worked with the authority in the 2008 final program EIR as part of the Section 404 Clean Water Act compliance, and concluded that the Pacheco Pass network alternative was most likely to contain the eventual least environmentally damaging practicable alternative, or better known as the LEDPA. The analysis of growth-inducing impacts was challenged in court and found to be in compliance with CEQA. High-speed train as a whole would induce a very small amount of growth per the Cambridge systematic study that was prepared, but most of this would occur in areas already anticipated to grow in the northern San Joaquin Valley. At the conclusion of the lawsuit that was filed challenging the 2008 final program EIR, the court found the authority's 2008 final program EIR was adequate in some areas, like the range of alternatives, the biological resource impacts, and the analysis of growth. The court did find there were some CEQA deficiencies in some areas. The 2010 revised program EIR was intended to address those areas. More specifically, the project description along Monterey Highway south of San Jose and analysis of the impacts of moving and shifting the highway on adjacent residences and businesses, on traffic, noise, and vibration, and Union Pacific freight operations. The relationship of the high-speed train to Union Pacific rights-of-way, and whether the need to be adjacent to UPRR rather than within its right-of-way would lead to additional impacts on property and land use. The comments on this revised program EIR were very extensive and raised a multiple of issues. I'll touch on a few. The discussion of the high-speed train alignment Union Pacific Railroad interface was provided and discussed in the 2010 revised program EIR as shown on this map. What this map shows is that you can get from the Central Valley to the Bay Area on both Altamont and Pacheco with relatively little interface with UPRR. However, some areas, such as the alignment to Oakland, shown in red, you can see it to the right there of the green line going up the bay, you would have particular issues with the UPRR within the right-of-way. The issues related to the high-speed train effects on UPRR freight operations were not further challenged. The 2010 revised final program EIR included extensive comments regarding the range of alternatives and responses to those comments. The comments raised many options that have been considered in the EIR already, such as stopping in San Jose. The authority received a large submission with an option called the SETEC proposal, which had several components identical or similar to those that the authority had already studied or had considered and ruled out. The range of alternatives discussed in the 2010 revised final program EIR was again challenged in court and found to be in compliance with CEQA. The subject of the ridership forecast and the ridership model were also a major topic raised in 2010. Ridership forecasts were prepared by Cambridge Systematics between 2005 and 2007. A peer review by the University of California, Berkeley Institute for Transportation Studies in 2010 questioned aspects of the model. The authority invited representatives from both Cambridge and ITS to present to it in July of 2010 at a meeting of the authority board. The board was able to hear from both groups and ask questions. The ridership model was challenged in court as part of the lawsuit on the 2010 revised final program EIR and found to be in compliance with CEQA. At the conclusion of the two lawsuits challenging the 2010 revised final program EIR, the court again found the program EIR was adequate in many areas. These included, among other things, the range of alternatives, the reliance on the ridership model, and the authority's procedures. The court still found some problems. These were in the areas where the court concluded analysis that should be included at the program EIR level was simply not done. These issues identified traffic, noise and vibration, and construction impacts from lane reduction and shifting of Monterey Highway south of San Jose, and traffic, noise, and vibration impacts of the four-track alignment on the peninsula, particularly the potential for loss of parallel streets and the potential for UPRR freight trains to be on the outside tracks of a four-track alignment. The 2012 partially revised final program EIR addressed these issues. The document also addressed new information, particularly the draft 2012 business plan and the revised 2012 business plan. The authority received 56 current submissions with over 400 comments. The key issues in this process are peninsula traffic impacts, concern that the authority has kept a four-track alignment for the peninsula on the one hand, rather than changing the project to be only blended system on the peninsula. Although less of an issue in this round of public comment, there were still a number of comments suggesting the range of alternatives was inadequate. So we'll just walk through these issues now. The peninsula cities that participated in the comment process generally all expressed concerns about traffic congestion from loss of lanes on streets parallel to certain portions of the right-of-way. These included San Mateo, San Carlos, Menlo Park, Atherton, and most prominently Palo Alto. Mitigation strategies were identified to address the traffic impacts. In addition, depending on project level design, refinements such as some of the anticipated lane loss could be avoided. A second key issue in this process was the relationship of the program EIR to the business plan. The draft 2012 business plan was issued in November 2011. The partially revised draft program EIR, which circulated starting in January, addressed the implementation strategy for the high-speed train system in the business plan to the extent it had implications for the analysis in the program EIR. For example, in Chapter 5 of the partially revised draft program EIR in front of you, addressed the phasing concepts in the business plan and described the different environmental consequences associated with the temporary northern high-speed train terminus, a condition which may occur if the high-speed train reached San Jose or Union City and either station served as a temporary endpoint while connecting service for a one-seat ride is implemented. Another example is that in Chapter 5 of the same document, there's a brief discussion of the blended system and what it might mean in terms of different impacts. The analysis of phased implementation, including the blended system, was done at a first-tier programmatic level. But we do want to make it clear that the implementation strategies in the business plan were not ignored. They were discussed and addressed as appropriate at the programmatic level of detail in the partially revised program EIR. Finally, some comments suggested that the program EIR needed further revision and recirculation to study additional alternatives. The focus this time was on the suggestions that 1, blended for the peninsula should be treated as a separate alternative, and 2, the authority should study in detail an Altamont Corridor rail project alignment with the blended system on the peninsula tacked on, shown in the dotted red line there. As part of responding to comments, staff and consultants looked at these options and provided responses in the partially revised final program EIR. The blended system is not considered a separate alternative. The blended system is a component of phased implementation for the second-tier project on the peninsula. It requires a separate second-tier planning process to develop it in more detail to analyze impacts at a level of greater detail than what was provided at the program EIR stage. The other proposal shown here is not a reasonable alternative because the facts available show it cannot meet the project purpose and need and project objectives. It is based on a slower, more circuitous alignment for the Altamont Corridor rail project. Travel times to San Francisco from LA are anticipated to be far longer than the preferred alternative, in excess of 3 hours and 17 minutes due to slower speeds and longer distance. In addition, although this alternative may avoid some impacts from the preferred alternative, it is not itself environmentally benign. There would be environmental impacts associated with this alternative as well. For these reasons, in the judgment of staff, the authority need not stop its process, study this additional idea, and circulate the idea for public comment. In short, the conclusion of staff and the consulting team is that even with new information, the range of alternatives studied in the program EIR remains reasonable and complies with CEQA. There are a few points I'd like to close with. There will be adverse impacts to the natural environment and the human environment from the high-speed train, no matter where you put it. There are also many, many benefits to be derived from the project. The decision before you, assuming you certify the program EIR, is to balance the different types and degrees of impacts in different locations with the project benefits and the ability of the different alternatives to meet the project objectives. The program EIR as a whole looked at 21 network alternatives. So Altamont runs across the top and Pacheco alignment alternatives run across the bottom there. We studied 11 Altamont Pass network alternatives shown here in blue on both of these slides. We studied 6 Pacheco Pass network alternatives shown here in blue on each one of these, and 4 combined Pacheco and Altamont Pass network alternatives. The range has been challenged twice and upheld twice, and the team feels strongly that this range of alternatives continues to be an adequate and appropriate range for the board's decision making. Finally, the program EIR sets forth the rationale for the staff recommendation that continues to be the Pacheco Pass network alternative serving San Francisco via San Jose. Why? Because it best meets the purpose and need for the proposed HST system. It minimizes impacts on wetlands, water bodies, and the environment, best serves the connection between Northern and Southern California, best utilizes an existing publicly owned rail corridor with potential for track sharing, still supported by the Bay Area region, and the Corps and the EPA have concurred that the preferred Pacheco Pass network alternative would most likely yield the LEPA. This rationale is set forth in more detail in Chapter 6 of your revised final program EIR binder. So with that, as you move forward today in your agenda items, we note that the partially revised final program EIR not only includes the 2012 document and response to comments, but also the 2010 revised final program EIR and the 2008 final program EIR. For 2012, we also prepared a 6-page addendum that you have in front of you about project benefits in light of the revised business plan and additional technical piece of information. This is also out front for the public. Let me just point out which the documents are that you're looking at here on the table. The taller stack is the 2008 final program EIR. The middle stack is the 2010 revised program EIR. And the one to the far right is the 2012 partially revised program EIR. That is the whole of the record in front of you. The partially revised the partially revised final program EIR was issued on April 6th. Documents were made available on the Authority website. They were distributed to over 930 federal, state, local agencies, tribes, elected officials, and other groups and individuals who commented on the 2007 documents, 2010, and 2012. These documents are also in 16 libraries across the study area. Notice of availability and consideration was distributed to a mailing list of over 24,000 individuals, and the notice was also published in 11 newspapers. All of the information discussed in this presentation is part of the entire record before you and is considered part of the partially revised final program EIR. This 6-volume of documents is provided to you for your decision-making process. In conclusion, staff recommends that the Board certify the partially revised final program EIR for compliance with CEQA and proceed to making new decisions after public comment. And now we'd like to open it up for questions.
First of all, Mr. Freitag, I want to thank you very much for a very comprehensive, very clear presentation. Even though I've been reading through these materials, even just the titles of the various documents and so forth get to be a bit of a blur. So as a newer member of the Authority, I very much appreciated that very lucid presentation. Let me now ask for public comment on both the staff report that was presented and also the pending action before the Board to adopt the final partially revised final program EIR. I'm going to get that. I'm going to trip over that all day. As I said, I've withdrawn those speaker cards that identify that they're for items 3 and 4. We'll take those together. I'm calling people in the order they are received. I do not see at this point any elected officials whom we would ask to go first. I'm sorry? And we'll set the time at 2 minutes for these. Why don't we set the time at 2 minutes for the public comments? So first is Stuart Flashman. And Mr. Flashman will be followed by Kathy Hamilton and then Dan Ursig.
Good morning again, Chair Richard and board members. And again, my name is Stuart Flashman, and I represent the plaintiffs in both Atherton 1 and Atherton 2 lawsuits. And it was pointed out to me today that I've now been working on this issue for 10 years, which I think is probably longer. I'm pretty sure it's longer than any of you board members have been on the board, and I think it's probably longer than most of the staff has been involved in this.
I think Ms. Shank might have been here at that time.
I want to say that we appreciate, again, as I said last week, we appreciate some of the changes that the Authority has made in the last year. However, we do not think that this EIR is ready for prime time. And this is the third time I'm standing here in front of this board and telling you you have an EIR that you should not be certifying. And twice before, I've said this, and you've gone ahead on recommendation of staff and certified an EIR, approved the project, been brought into court, and the court has said, nope, you were wrong. And I'm presuming that you are thinking at this point, well, third time's the charm. But there is another third phrase that might apply here, and that's 3 strikes. And we know the consequences of that. And I would hope that you're not going to go ahead in that direction, because it would be a shame if the result of your moving forward here would be that eventually the high-speed rail system didn't happen. Because most of my clients actually would like to see a high-speed rail system, but they would like to see it done right. And frankly, this project, EIR, doesn't do it right. The major issue, I think probably the biggest single issue, is the refusal to study the blended alternatives. It's a true alternative, which it is. And Chair Richard, yesterday at the legislative hearings, acknowledged that this will meet the criteria that need to be met, and yet you're not considering it. That's wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flashman. Kathy Hamilton, followed by Dan Ursig, followed by Jim Bigelow.
Hi, this is Kathy Hamilton, Community
Good morning, Ms.
Coalition.
Hamilton.
Hello, how are you?
Well,
That took
thanks.
2 minutes. Anyway, I just wanted to make a couple of notes on this particular alignment. Union Pacific does not own the right-of-way, but they retain vestige rights, and they get to make decisions on who is on the tracks as far as intercity rail. This opinion is lacking and very important for you to move forward, and I understand that we are more than a year behind in obtaining permission, and that for that alone you shouldn't certify, you should get that first. The other thing I wanted to say, while the blended system does hold some promise if it is done right, it does not follow what Senator Simidian, Anna Eshoo, and Rich Gordon promoted. Still in this EIR is an elevated track option and a 4-track option. And most importantly, we haven't gotten the opinion from the Attorney General that that the blended system complies with 1A and 3034, and there are several problems with that. So what is happening, let me just borrow something from Senator Simidian. He said, if you do not reduce the scope, you will leave a sword hanging over the head of all of the residents and businesses along a 50-mile crowded corridor. So please do not certify. I'm sorry, we don't trust you this time to go ahead with the blended. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Dan Ursig, followed by Jim Bigelow, followed by Catherine Phillips. I'm sorry, Ms. Hamilton, did you need something? It is. Morning, Mr. Ursig.
Good morning. My name is Dan Ursig. I've been active in neighborhood preservation and restoration for 27 years in the city of San Jose. I'm here representing a neighborhood association called the Greater Gardner Neighborhood Coalition, which represents 3 of the oldest, most historic neighborhoods in San Jose, just south of the Diridon train station. This might sound a little strange because I don't think you have many people complimenting you, and usually I'm not complimenting you either. But in this instance, our coalition would like to take this opportunity to do that. I'm here to comment on Agenda Item 4, specifically the 280-87 bypass. Much time was spent with your staff and our neighborhood to find a solution for both our neighborhood and HSR. We would like to thank you, your staff and the board, for keeping this bypass in the revised EIR. Also, we'd like to give an extra thanks to Gary Kinnerly for his patience and clear thinking on this matter. I think I'm almost out of time. We look forward to working with you in the future, and we really hope that we can all take the time to make high-speed rail what it really needs to be. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I was going to say we are tempted to extend time for people who are thanking us, but we don't do that.
I don't have any other good things to say.
Okay.
Jim Bigelow with the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber. The revised partial document appears to be much improved, and in spirit of the court order, hopefully it will meet the test. The discussions relative to Altamont Pass and the Dumbarton Corridor, those have gone on for years and years, and I would note there's a $19 million EIR, EIS plan that's going to come out in the next couple of months for the Dumbarton Rail Corridor, which is in the photo shown by staff in the staff report, and we would take exception to seeing that track right on the Dumbarton Rail the way it's portrayed, because that's a needed other connection. We have supported Pacheco Pass for a long time after looking at the merits of both Altamont and Pacheco, and I think there's been a lot of work done. I've attended a lot of meetings relative to the Monterey Highway south of San Jose and the work that's been done. So there are detailed project-level work that's underway, and it's really going to identify the detail, which is the level below the program document you're considering today. I would hope that we could move forward with the recertification and move on and start looking at the results of the project-level work and the blended system. The blended system is very, very important on the San Francisco Peninsula. Some cities don't like the 4-track, and that in itself could contribute to some litigation in this document. But you know best, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bigelow. I have to say that I suspect you're in the minority of people who think we know best, but we appreciate your comments very much. Catherine Phillips, followed by David Schunbrunn, followed by Richard Tolmack. Good morning, Ms. Phillips.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Phillips with Sierra Club, California. First, I'd like to thank Chairman Richard and the rest of the board members for the attitude and openness that we've seen. We think it's a shift from previous authority approaches, and we really do appreciate that in the last few months. There's been a lot of reaching out. We've had a lot of effective conversations. I'm here today, though, to ask the board to take appropriate action to ultimately shift the train's east-west route between the San Joaquin Valley and the Bay Area from the Pacheco Pass to the Altamont Pass. A shift in the routing would avoid directly impacting California's largest inland contiguous wetland, an area heavily used by birds and other wildlife. It would avoid inducing sprawl in an area that's mostly rural or otherwise less developed than the Altamont Pass route, and it would drive the train through a highly populated but underserved transportation corridor by going through the Altamont Pass, and it would complement existing and anticipated growth and transportation improvements in the Altamont Pass, the North San Joaquin Valley, and the Southern Sacramento Valley and areas west of the pass. And shifting the route just makes better sense for the environment and for a good transportation system, and frankly, I think it'll make this thing move faster. And I mean by this, the process, not necessarily the train. So I urge you to encourage your board to go back and study the Altamont Pass blended approach that they haven't studied yet, and consider that as a way of getting this train moving. Thank you very much.
Ms. Phillips, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
Since you represent perhaps the most prominent environmental organization, as a decision maker, I just heard the staff indicate that we're going to have environmental impacts on sensitive wetlands no matter which way we go. The Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge from the Altamont approach versus the grasslands from the Pacheco. Do you have thoughts on that to help guide?
Yeah, I mean, that assumes that the only approach once you get over to the Bay Area is to build a new bridge or expand a bridge for the train across, use the Dumbarton Bridge approach. But my understanding is that there are alternatives, that if you use some kind of blended approach where you took the train down to San Jose and then proceeded using alternative methods, that you could still have a very fast train. You could get people moving. You'd improve the Bay Area transportation system, and you'd avoid what is, frankly, a very, very sensitive wildlands area. And if I may just share sort of a personal anecdote, I rode with actually a number of different people, including a couple of legislators, a train from Madrid to Toledo, a high-speed rail train. It was very comfortable, a very nice ride, but we had, because the legislators were there, not because I was there, we had the opportunity to go up and actually be in the little area where they were driving, so we saw the front view. And ironically, as we're going up there, the beautiful bird of prey was smashed by the windshield by the train. And, the interior wetland area, the grasslands ecological area, is on the edge of or right in the Pacific Flyway. So I can imagine that going forward in the future, you might anticipate, even if you put it higher up, you're still going to have some bird-train conflicts. And you may have a density of bird-train conflicts there that could cause problems, just as we've seen problems with bird-windmill conflicts on the Altamont Pass. So I would encourage you to consider an alternative approach, one that doesn't necessarily go across the Dumbarton Bridge, but uses a more blended system.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. David Schönbrunn, followed by Richard Tolmack.
Recognizing the biological impacts that we just heard about for both Pacheco and Altamont alternatives, my organization and its colleagues submitted a new alternative comprised of the Altamont Corridor Rail Project, which has already been deemed feasible, and that optimized for speed, coupled with the blended approach going from San Jose to San Francisco. This alternative would avoid all the major environmental impacts identified in previous EIRs. The FEIR refused to study this alternative, contrary to the mandate of CEQA. I sent you a letter this morning. It went to each of you, and a letter has been handed in physically here today. You, as project sponsor, are not entitled to say the full build is our project, the blended system is a mere implementation strategy. When an environmentally superior alternative is proposed, you have to study it and then adopt it. If you insist on certifying this document, you will be back in court and lose. There is a very clear subtext to the response to comments. It says to us, we've already made up our minds where the tracks go. Please don't keep bothering us with rational arguments because we will never, ever agree with you. Even when you have strong arguments, we will make stuff up if we have to. PB claimed we said things that we never said, just so that they could knock them down. It's despicable and unprofessional, and it's contrary, and it's also wrong on CEQA. You're a new board. You are not responsible for the decisions of the past. Have you learned anything from this organization's two previous expensive and time-consuming losses? Please don't follow your consultants into yet another morass. You are tasked by the governor with setting a new tone for this agency. Please do so by demonstrating leadership and walking back from the brink. Please send this EIR back for revisions consistent with CEQA.
Thank you, Mr. Schönbrunn. Mr. Tolmack.
Rich Tolmack, California Rail Foundation. Thank you, Chair and members. I want to focus on the great advantages that there are to going through the Altamont Pass versus Pacheco. From a Sacramento perspective, from a Stockton perspective, from a Modesto perspective, Pacheco is an atrocity. Trying to go from Sacramento to the Bay Area through Chowchilla is something that no rational person would do in a car. It's also crazy to take a train that route. It's nearly 300 miles, and it wastes energy. That is part of the ridership your Pacheco alternative is based on, is the supposition that there's going to be a great number of people going from Sacramento, Stockton, to the Bay Area via a crazy route. And it's something you need to address this time around. You need to get actual verifiable figures that Caltrans and other transportation agencies could actually buy into. What you're basing this bad EIR on is a set of already discredited ridership figures. You need to get a fresh look. And that's why in these two prior times you've come up with a silly result instead of something that the community could buy into. This is why you're having so much problem getting through any place. It's because so far you guys haven't listened. This time you should listen to the public and you should look carefully at the ridership claims. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tolmack. I just want to make sure that anybody else who provided a speaker card in the past, it didn't look like any of them were on these items, in case I missed that. Okay, seeing no indications to the contrary, Mr. Filens.
Thank you, Chairman Richard. So we're moving on to item number 4 now on the agenda, and it provides the board an opportunity to consider taking action on the draft resolution in your board book. That's numbered 12-17. And this resolution, if adopted by the board, would do a number of things, and I just want to take a few minutes to kind of walk you through and make it clear what you'll be voting on if you adopt this. First, the resolution 1217 would certify the partially revised final program EIR as being in compliance with CEQA. In taking these steps, the board would be making 3 certifications. First, that the program EIR has been completed in compliance with CEQA. Secondly, that the program EIR has been presented to the board, that the board has reviewed and considered the information in it prior to taking any action to approve the project. And 3, that the program EIR reflects that the authority's independent judgment has been rendered. So I'd like to emphasize these 3 certifications. On the first one, it's the opinion of staff that with the partially revised final program EIR, all issues identified by the court in the CEQA litigation has been appropriately addressed. On the second, I'd like to remind the board members and make clear to the public that the staff has provided the entire program EIR to the board, including the 2008 amendments, the 2010 documents, and the 2012 documents. And on the third certification, I'd like to emphasize again that the board must certify the EIR reflects its independent judgment. And what this means is that the board is taking a fresh look now at all the program EIR materials, all the items generated from 2005 to the present, and that the board must in good faith take this all in, exercise its own judgment, not just a rubber stamp of the recommendations of staff. And what we call this is taking a fresh look, but it's not a blank slate, because you also need to consider the whole of the record before you made this decision. The second thing that you'll be doing today is the resolution would approve what are called CEQA findings of fact, and that's been presented in the materials that you have received and have read. These findings are attached to your resolution as Attachment A. These are required by law and essentially recount that the authority has adopted all feasible mitigation strategies at this program level to avoid, reduce, or mitigate for impacts. The third thing that the resolution addresses, and what you'll be voting on if you adopt this resolution, is that it would approve what's called a statement of overriding considerations. This document sets forth the agency's balancing of the environmental impacts of the project that cannot with certainty be fully mitigated against the economic, legal, social, technological, and environmental benefits of the project. I'd like to note that the revised statement of overriding considerations has been provided to you and in a red strikeout format with more clear references to the benefits of high-speed rail as identified in the business plan. And this item is also made available to the public this morning, as it was you this morning, with other board materials, and so you can see these few changes that were made. The fourth thing that this resolution would ask you to do would be to adopt a mitigation monitoring and reporting program, which is required by CEQA. And this document is attached as Exhibit B in your materials. The fifth point that you would be considering in adopting this resolution would be to approve the Pacheco Pass network alternative serving the San Francisco via San Jose, as discussed in the staff presentation and as recommended in the program EIR document itself. So this step is an approval of the programmatic project. I just want to make clear here that it's that this step, what this step does or doesn't do. The approval of the programmatic project is essential, is in essence an approval to advance this particular route for more environmental analysis. It's not an approval to build anything. It's a programmatic level document. Finally, the resolution includes language under new steps, or next steps, pardon me, that would direct staff in how to proceed. And on this language, I want to call your attention to the last paragraph. What this particular paragraph would do is to direct staff to work with Caltrain and local governments to develop a description of a blended system project for the peninsula. And then the language directs staff to focus the second tier EIR on that blended system approach. And this language has been included because staff believes it's consistent with the business plan that was just released and it's consistent with the program EIR that's before you. With that, I take the opportunity to answer any questions. And at this time, you should deliberate on this issue and consider decision.
Thank you, Mr. Felenz. Mr. Hartnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a number of questions. First, just a general comment. I appreciate all the hard work that's been put into the revised documents. In my prior capacities, I've had the opportunity to review a number of very substantial environmental impact reports, and I find this to be a very comprehensive treatment of the required subject areas. So I appreciate the work that's been done. But I still have some questions. And Mr. Chair, my experience with these in the past and other forums is sometimes it appears that I'm hogging the questions. And so I don't intend to do that, but I do have a number, and if at a certain point you want to cut me off, please, I won't be embarrassed if you do that, but I do have a number of questions.
Mr. Hartnett, we have the room till 1:30, and I'm not going to cut you off.
Yeah, but I've had a couple bottles of water already, so I can't last that long.
I may beat you to it this one. It might be me. So.
First, just in Mr. Felenz, and I know you may defer some of these questions to others. The fact that there's been an appeal filed of the decision, the court decisions, that I just want to be clear, that does not mean that we can't proceed if we choose to today to recertify this revised.
That's correct. You can still take this action today.
Okay.
The appeal was filed on the 13th of April, last Friday, and it stays the Superior Court rulings. But you can move ahead with this action today.
Okay. There's also a question raised with respect to the the business plan having been recently adopted, and it refers to the blended approach, I want to be careful on this. We're not precluded from proceeding now as this document is drafted based upon the recent adoption of the business plan, which does make reference to the blended approach, are we?
No. The business plan is not an environmental document. It's separate and distinct from that. And the fact that the business plan was adopted does not preclude you from moving ahead with this document. In fact, the business plan and this programmatic environmental document is consistent with each other. They both talk about phasing, and they both talk about and analyze blending, the blended system. So there are no problems with that.
Okay. And I note with the resolutions that are included is the direction that if we proceed, that at the project level, in the second tier EIR, that the direction be to study that. I know there's been continuing work by Caltrain, and also we had suspended work with respect to the overall project EIR because of both the litigation and the ongoing work relative to the blended approach, as I recall.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The board did ask that the environmental document at the project level between San Jose and San Francisco stop, a timeout to look at the programmatic level document that had to have some changes made, and also to consider this blended concept that had been proposed by some local elected officials and state legislators.
Okay. And while we're talking about the blended system, can you comment on how, in comparing the ultimate alternatives versus Pacheco, how did we tell at this stage, or do we need to tell whether the blended approach works best with one or the other?
The programmatic EIR looks at the impacts of blended, and you can consider that in the context of either route.
Okay. So I think, is there some additional comment on that?
Sure. So for the blended system, would it be better with Altamont or Pacheco?
Yes, or how do we, are we making that determination now, or how does that fit in?
Well, the Pacheco corridor would use the blended system. You would still have benefits from the high-speed train system, but you would still have, you may not have the same level of benefits with any of the alternatives using the blended system from San Francisco to San Jose. You could have improved benefits related to air quality, but not at the same level as what you would have with the full system. The same with energy. Traffic impacts may differ because you're not getting all of the great separations in that you would with the full system. Dominic, you want to add some more here?
Yes. My name is Dominic Spathling, the program management team. From an operational standpoint, we really looked at whether it would make much difference if you came the Altamont corridor or the Pacheco corridor and could tie in with a blended system on the peninsula, and we found that you could. You're able to do that on either of the alignments.
Okay. All right. And I've read the materials that refer to that in the revised plan as well. I have actually more. Maybe this is more of a legal question. You could interpret the court rulings in a kind of an oversimplified way to say that the court found in both the Atherton lawsuits that there were problems with the level of detail in the program ER. But to me, that's kind of an people may say that, but it's kind of an oversimplified view of it because as I understand it, there's a level of detail in any program ER, but the the specific details are subject to the second tier analysis, which is the project level EIR. And so I just want to, just talk about the impressions, really, in a sense, of the court rulings in that regard. Is that really an oversimplified statement?
The level of details were adequate in the programmatically EIR. It's just it was the descriptions of the project description was not complete enough, and so we've addressed that more thoroughly in the revised document. And when we talk about the details, the project level details will come out in the next tiered document, the project level document. So both documents are quite different. The staff believes that the details were adequate for the programmatic level document. Initially, the court just wanted a better project description.
Okay. Maybe more of a non-legal thing. On the environmental considerations of Pacheco versus Altamont, there's obviously a lot of the materials in connection with that, and there are many factors that go into the choice of one alternative over the other. Environmental is obviously a very important one, and there seems to be some conflicting views on what's the best environmentally wise. But can you comment about the comparison of the impacts on the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge versus the grassland ecological area in the two alternatives?
Sure. If you remember in the presentation, the photos that we showed there crossing, on the presentation where we showed crossing Don Edwards and versus GEA, both alignments would have impacts. You're not going to get away from impacts. But for Pacheco, you had 15.6 acres of wetlands crossing on the network alternative that would cross the GEA. But within the GEA itself, you had about 11.5 acres of wetlands. So and then compared to Dumbarton crossing, where you had 33 acres of wetlands just within that bay area. So definitely more than half less than the impact. You'd still have impacts on sensitive species. That's pretty much a wash related to plants and wildlife, pretty much equal on both of those. So, and then on the other portion for the GEA crossing, we're looking at approximately 3-mile elevated structure along there to allow wildlife movement and less impact on water resources.
Mr. Hartnett?
Yes, sure.
I had a question on that same subject. So would you just, before you move on to a different subject area, let me...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is that right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. This is the thing that I think has been the biggest struggle for me in looking at this. You heard my question for Ms. Phillips of the Sierra Club. And I understood what she was saying about the grasslands area being on the flyway, which means that there's the possibility of, or perhaps we even would say that, some likelihood of some interaction between the trains and wildlife there. In looking at these, I don't pretend to know the details about the Don Edwards Wildlife Refuge, but I presume it also would we be looking at similar types of impacts
Sure.
moving through those?
Yeah, the potential for bird strikes happens anywhere. For areas going across to the GEA, there is potential for additional bird strikes, but you also have that potential within the Bay Area where you've got, lots of waterfowl located in that location.
Now, the other question on that was, I don't want to get this wrong, but I thought I understood from Ms. Phillips that she was suggesting that there were other pathways, if you will, that would avoid either of those sensitive wildlife areas. I'm guessing that would mean coming down something along the UP alignment down towards San Jose and back up or something like that. Do you have any sense of what that would be?
Yeah, we studied one of the network alternatives that we had on multiple maps there. We had it coming across Altamont, coming across the Diablo Range, and then down to San Jose, and then back up the peninsula. Do you want to speak to that at all?
Can you comment a little bit on the issues with that particular one? Or? Yeah.
I wish I had a photographic memory from everything in there.
Let the record show that Mr. Freitag was pointing to about a 4-foot stack of documents and said that my answer would be in there somewhere. So,
if you look in Chapter 7 and Chapter 6 of the document where we talk about we go through the recommendation of the preferred alternative, we talk about the different network alternatives and how they stack up to the recommended. And I believe, we had slower travel times being probably one of the main things.
Yeah, that was, as I'm struggling with this, that was the impression I got, was that we would be challenged on the travel time to meet the Prop 1A requirements.
If elaborate a little more on that, one of the interesting aspects of it is the way that we would come into San Jose would be similar to how the BART station currently is configured at SFO Airport, where you'd have to go in and then reverse direction and then go back up the corridor. And that, at least in this document, we assume that would take 20 minutes in itself to reverse the direction of the train, and that's what the record states. So that, along with the sort of semi-circuitous route of coming down to the end of the bay and then proceeding back north up to San Francisco, has pretty significant effects on travel time and most likely on ridership too. And that's also as part of the Chapter 7, Chapter 6.
And I just want to thank you, since I was involved in that BART to SFO design and alignment, for pointing out that it's very kludgy. So that's... No, just... All right. Mr. Hartnett.
I have some more on that same subject here, but I noticed Mr. Balgorn.
Mr. Balgorn?
I was just curious if we could ask Catherine Phillips again about how close a call was that for, in your mind, between the Altamont and the Pacheco? Because it sounds like people are saying that there's less environmental damage. Some people are saying there's less environmental damage in Pacheco Pass. You're saying it's the other way. How close a call was that for each side?
I think you have to look at it in total, in the whole of the whole network alternative going Altamont versus Pacheco. Altamont, you have a lot more people living along the corridors as opposed to animals and plants along the Pacheco alignment and farmland. So you have a trade-off of what the impacts are. It's not, there's not one particular item that puts it over another. It's, looking at the total of the environmental impacts.
Could I hear what Catherine had to think about that as well?
Thank you. The thing about Altamont, when you mention a lot of people, that means you have a lot of potential riders. The thing about Pacheco is you do have these wildland areas, but you don't have a lot of potential riders. But what you do have is the potential for inducing sprawl into those areas. So you could indirectly, by putting the train through that pass, also create greater harm to that wetland and those birds than you would by putting it in another place. It's not just the bird kills and bird strikes, which it sounds like it's kind of a wash. It also is the sprawl inducement, which then has a multiplier effect on the wildlands areas. And just from a transportation point of view, just makes more sense to put the train where the people are, and especially in this case, you'd be able to take greater advantage of it from the Sacramento area and from the northern San Joaquin Valley area.
What about the 10,000 acres that's getting that we're going to put in the
Bay Area?
Right.
Well, to be quite frank, it would be our preference not to put it through any wetland, and that's why my understanding is there hasn't been a full analysis of this other blended approach. And while there would be slower speed times, what I have been hearing is that's because the sort of quick and dirty analysis, not the deep analysis, has been, well, you can't straighten out the route and you can't make it as fast as you should be able to. I should emphasize that we support the notion of high-speed rail, and the idea of doing blended, what we're really concerned about is to make sure that we have something that is connected and works from the get-go and something that actually gets done. And my big concern, in addition to the environmental impacts, is that if we continue to have this Pacheco versus Altamont problem, we won't get to a point where we'll have something on the ground. And doing this alternative where you would go to where the people are and potentially avoid two, or at least analyzing it deeply, and avoid two, potential bird impacts or wetlands impacts makes a lot of sense. I think this board, from my impression, is certainly has been more open to this kind of conversation than we've seen in the past, and I do thank you for that, and thank you for listening to my views on this.
I want to, yes, go ahead, Mr. President.
I just wanted to comment on something. The sprawl doesn't occur because there's an alignment there. The sprawl occurs because of stations. The station location and placement is a determinant of where growth is likely to occur. So in Prop 1A, there's language in there that says there's no station between Merced and Gilroy. Specifically, there's no station or maintenance facility in Los Banos. So the potential for growth, nobody wants to just move out and live next to a rail line, is probably much less potential than around stations in an urban area.
Yeah. Can I clarify something?
Mr. Hartnett.
Yes, I think when this might have been lost as Mr. Baglinoff was making his comment, there's a authority obligation with respect to 10,000 acres of preserving 10,000 acres in the grasslands area, and so I think that relates to this discussion as well. So I think
I might not have been very articulate in my question, but that is my question.
Yeah, and so that comes into play as well in terms of the choice. And Mr. Chair, I think there's a difference in terms of the legal status of some of the protected areas as well.
Yes.
Maybe you can comment on that, because that also comes into the equation.
Mm-hmm. So the National Wildlife Refuge for Don Edwards was formed by an act of Congress in, I believe, 1972. So it's protected. So any changes or anything within it has to be approved by the Department of the Interior, the Secretary of the Department of the Interior. The GEA is, there's a long description of it in there, but let me just give you kind of a short answer. It's a non-jurisdictional, non-regulatory, generally designated area used by the Fish and Wildlife to identify an area for priority purchase of public easements for wetlands, preservation, and enhancement. And then within the GEA, to the north part of it, it's a large area, but within the north part of it area, there's the San Luis National Wildlife Refuge, far away from this alignment.
Mr. Hartnett, if I might, I'd like to just exercise one prerogative of the chair, just out of what I think is a sense of fairness. Ms. Phillips is a recognized environmental expert, and we appreciate her answering questions, but it resulted in her getting some additional time here, and I think what I would ask is I'd ask those speakers to just be fair with us on this specific question that we asked Ms. Phillips, which related to the specific issue of the relative impacts between the Don Edwards wildlife area and the grasslands wildlife area as it pertains to our decision between Altamont and Pacheco. I would offer to any of the prior speakers who cared to comment on that the opportunity to do so, just so that we have a fair opportunity for all people to have an equal opportunity to address the board.
David Schoenbrunn, I appreciate very much. Because I had wanted to add a point to what Ms. Phillips had to say, and that is, in the 2010 litigation, we filed a biological opinion that said that the analysis done at the program level had been inadequate because it did not look at
comparing species. It was so broad brush in terms of acres of wetland that it did not get to the issue of biological sensitivity. And so you have no evidence in the record at this time as to which of those wetlands areas is more biologically sensitive and more biologically valuable. And in the absence of that information, we've argued consistently that you can't make a decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schoenbrunn. Mr. Bigelow, then Mr. Flashman.
On the Dumbarton Rail Corridor, it's a refurbishment of a regional commuter rail service, and it falls in a separate category with respect to a rehabilitation of a corridor going through the Don Edwards Wildlife Area. And the EIR, EIS that's gone on, the biologists and everything involved in that refurbishment to do a regional rail project have been working out the sensitivities and the mitigations on tidal actions and flows that were changed by the berm back in the early 1900s. So if you were to put in a new rail, a new shadow, because only one track goes across the part of that, then it changes the whole project with BCDC, and you end up in years and years of additional permit questions and so forth. So it would take years for high-speed rail if it were to try and go across over the water to go through the process. And we've been at it a number of years with the EIR, EIS already. So it's not simple.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bigelow. Counselor, Mr. Flashman.
Thank you. And I'm not going to speak primarily as an attorney. I'm going to speak as someone who used to be a biologist before I became an attorney.
I think that's allowed.
Okay. But I think there are a couple of things that I think are very worth thinking about here. One is that you do have the court litigation, and the court litigation basically said, yeah, you've got enough substantial evidence to support your decision on biological issues on Pacheco versus Altamont. Now, that's a legal standpoint. I don't know that necessarily just the fact that you've got some substantial evidence to support you means that's the best choice. That's a legally defensible choice, but it's not necessarily the best choice or the right choice. And I think that's a separate issue that you need to have in front of you, is thinking about what's the best thing to do here, not just what's legally permissible. The other point I want to make, and a couple of points. One is on Dumbarton and using the Dumbarton Rail Bridge as it's being proposed to be refurbished. That would fit with a blended approach. That is to say, what the EIRs have looked at is saying, let's do a high-speed rail bridge. Let's do a bridge that would be what we'd like to do, is a full steam ahead high-speed rail going across the bay at at least 110 and maybe 220 miles an hour. But if you did it using not using the type of equipment that the Caltrain would use in terms of using diesel locomotives, but if you did it using high-speed rail equipment the same way it would be going down the peninsula on the blended approach, then what's being done in refurbishing, the only thing you'd need to change would be to add the electrification.
Okay.
And then you could use it for both. It wouldn't be ideal, but it could work, and it might be faster than going around.
Okay.
And so that's another point. And again, the other point is that you do have an alternative that wasn't studied that would look at going around. And there's another alternative that hasn't really even been touched, which is the idea of going across parallel to 237, which doesn't get you all the way down to San Jose, but does get you across without going across the wetlands and across the bay.
Thank you. Mr. Tolmack, on this narrow question?
Yeah. But as he's come up, I think Mr. Flashman proved the point that attorneys are human too. So I like that.
The record will so show.
But it was attorneys that said that.
Right. You're right. That may.
Thank you. I wanted to throw in one other factor on the Don Edwards Reserve. That the group that has sponsored and protected the refuge there is fully in favor of using it for rail and for high-speed rail, and they've been a supporter on our side. So I feel that this debate about that somehow going across there with a train at a reasonable speed is somehow environmentally damaging when you already have a highway right next to this. And your contact, you can improve the tidal flows by this rebuilding job that they're doing. You can open up sections that are currently blocked off and therefore don't have full adequacy for the wildlife that's using it, and improve the thing. And that's what we were originally proposing, is that mitigation be done, which actually improves the area and the refuge and improves it as a habitat. And the other thing I wanted to get to was that the specific timings involved in a reverse of direction on a high-speed train. In Germany, they seem to be able to do it in Frankfurt in 5 minutes. I don't see why in California we would take 20.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbeck. Mr. Hartnett, thank you. I just felt it was important to make sure we had a fair opportunity for all our citizens to speak before the board.
Thank you. I agree with that. Just on that subject of the environmental considerations, I have a question on the Henry Coe State Park, because that was, I know, a substantial point of discussion as this proceeded. How is that now affected by the Pacheco alternative?
It's not. The alignment is further south in the Henry Coe State Park. You have 152 as a buffer as well. And, at the project level, as they move into additional studies, there may be different elevation profiles, whether it's elevated or in a tunnel, being looked at.
So I just recall that it's been a big point of discussion. And what about any state wildlife areas?
Okay. Pardon me?
Are there any, in the Pacheco alternative, the impact on state wildlife areas?
Not within the GEA. We're, we're south of the Los Banos wildlife area. We're definitely well south of the San Luis National Wildlife Refuge along Henry Miller Road.
Okay. I've got some questions that are, these have been generally out of Chapter 6, which is in the plan.
Chapter.
I have other more specific questions as well, but I want to ask about the ridership, the conclusions of the staff in terms of the ridership forecast. I take it that the ridership forecasts are not in and of themselves determinative of the selection of Altamont versus Pacheco. Is that a first? Looking at the broader picture, so you're not. It's a factor. Environmental is a factor, but the forecasts themselves aren't determinative. Is that a fair statement?
I would say it's part of the overall package of everything that we're looking at.
Okay. As I look at part of our task as we're going through the environmental documents, I'm struck by the reference to people or cities or organizations that support one thing over another, and how that's a factor. And I look at that as people make their comments that they're important for us to know what people are thinking. It helps us hone in on important issues, but it's not. We're not on a board saying, well, how many people or organizations are on this side and how many are on that side. And that's not how we're supposed to look at this. We should be informed by and educated by the comments, but it's not raw numbers. So sometimes in the report it almost suggests that, well, gee, this many people say this and this many people say that, to me that's not the proper balance, and I don't think the report's intending to be that way. Secondly, when we hear people and organizations' opinions, I think we want to hear all the opinions, but the opinions are not necessarily based upon factual data. Their gut feelings, their political philosophy, there are all sorts of different rationales for opinions. And so I think, to me, our job is to really step back and independently look at the record and the data. And that's our role, not to count the numbers, but to really look at the data and be comfortable that it's accurate, and that when we're striking a balance, it's not just based upon who wants what, but what are the appropriate considerations to go into the balance. And so I make that as a general comment because I think it's important. It's so important for us to hear people's opinions, as I say, because it helps us focus. But I think we have to make sure that we're doing our fiduciary role as we look at the record. And that reminds me on some of the other parts of Chapter 6 that I'd like to just briefly touch on. I notice there's on the Monterey Highway issue in San Jose, and I know we've addressed that as required. I believe we've addressed that as required by the court, but it's an interesting conundrum to me in which I think the plaintiffs in the lawsuit are not from cities that are affected by the Monterey Highway issue. It's the city of San Jose, and the changes that would be made seem to be consistent with and embraced by San Jose and in their plan. So it's just one of those interesting things that you see people from one community, filing a lawsuit over issues that are in another community in which they're not affected, and that community wants to have those changes. And I know that's still not. We're not supposed to. I take it we're still supposed to step back because we need to look at those Atherton lawsuit claims and make sure that we're doing the right thing, even if San Jose fully embraced it. So I understand that, but it's just an interesting commentary on how the legal system works sometimes.
I would agree with you that it's important that we step back and look at issues, and I'm particularly interested in what a lot of the people on both sides had to say today, because that how they view staff report, because they put a lot of effort into this as well. So I think that it's productive to have everyone spend a little more time than the 2 minutes, and I think we've done that here today, where we've gotten a better understanding of the issues that are being presented by various organizations. So it will make it. I don't know that it makes it easier for me to make a decision, because there's a lot of literature or a lot of things that we've discussed, a lot of things that we've read, and I just want to make sure that the staff has considered all the input from each of these other sides, so that we're sure we're making the right decision when we go forward.
Yeah, and as I read the entire report, and particularly on Chapter 6, there's no doubt that the ultimate alternative has a lot to commend it. I mean, as you look at it, it truly is a balance, and I think I can see why people would think it's a close call, because there's something to be said for both, and I appreciate that's presented in such a way that we can step back and look at it as we see it, and we get to make that balancing decision rather than the staff. And so I appreciate that the data is there. I think those are I think I've gotten most of my questions out, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Hartnett. Vice Chair Richards.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate many of your questions, Director Hartnett, and I've been rapidly checking mine off as you've gone through them. But I'm struck by a couple of three things that I would like to ask staff. One, in your comments with regards to general considerations and fiduciary roles and responsibility, as we have read through these documents in various areas, we also discuss cost, and certainly we're responsive to cost and the manner in which we manage the taxpayers' dollars. What I'm interested in is from a CEQA perspective. How do we import the costs into the decision-making process in addition to other environmental factors?
Well, for what we did in these documents, cost was a component of everything that we looked at. So, not one issue really outweighed the other. It was looking at everything across the spectrum equally, trying to identify which would be the most superior alternative to put forth.
It makes it even more difficult. I mean, in some ways, it almost ends up being the leveraging factor because, as Jim did say, I mean, when you look at the Altamont and the Pacheco Pass alternatives, I mean, there's a lot to be said with either one of them. And so in some instances, as I've read through this, costs really become a major factor in consideration, certainly given the importance of cost to the taxpayers. I'm wondering also, is there anything in importing the idea of this blended system that causes any issues or concerns with regards to the court order of last November with the results of the Atherton 1 and 2 litigation? In other words, the contemplation of a blended system is not inconsistent with what we are able to move forward on today.
Correct. We see the blended system as an implementation strategy of the overall project.
Okay.
And we did discuss that specifically in Chapter 5 of the partially revised document in front of you.
Okay. Thank you. And with regards to something that I had read also, and I'm not sure if you mentioned it earlier, with regards to station stops between Merced and Gilroy, is there any likelihood that with our action today that would change? In other words, by future boards or future decisions?
It would have to... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I might want to just speak to that. Under Proposition 1A right now, there's it prohibits the station between Merced and Gilroy. So theoretically, there may be an opportunity to change that law, but in fact, it would have to go back to the people as for an amendment to that Prop 1A law. So as an initiative, and probably very unlikely.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Flens. Just with regards to responsiveness to the public comments today, which I found extremely helpful, from a staff and management's perspective, is there anything here today that you've heard that causes you to perhaps suggest to us that either we haven't studied this or considered the comments that have been raised here today to a level that we would feel comfortable that we have performed the responsibilities that we have in looking at all the environmental alternatives and implications of this action today?
No, because like I said, we've had extensive public participation throughout this process. We've responded to almost 5,500 comments specifically, and in each of those we responded with specific answers, and if they had some relevance to the document, we made sure the documents were updated with that specific information. So I think what we have heard today and what we can continue to hear are items that we have studied at some point through the document process.
You agree with that also, Mr. Flens?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Other questions? Other members? Mr. Schoenbrunn, you referenced a letter. Did you send us a letter today? We have a letter. I'm sorry?
did, yes, and there's a copy with your book.
One copy, okay. Just so that just so we have that on the record, I understand. Okay. Okay, I had not seen this until this moment. We also have a letter from Mr. Flashman that I think most of us have seen. What I'd like to suggest at this moment is that we take a break just until noon, about 7 or 8 minute break. I'd like to look at this and make sure that members have the opportunity to avail themselves to review it. I think, this board understands the significance of this decision, and I know that we've gone through these materials. We want to make sure that we're hearing from and considering all the opinions here. So why don't we break until noon, maybe 5 afternoon, and then let me just say to Mr. Schönbrunn, you have other copies of it? One more copy, thank you, sir. Okay, we'll break till 5 afternoon, and let me just say to the rest of the public, I do understand everybody's items before us are important today. We do have this as a legal matter that we have to perform, which is why we put it first. So I appreciate people's patience. And then once the board acts on this, we'll immediately go to public comment on other things. So we'll be in recess for what looks like 10 minutes right now. Thanks. Ms. Chief is going to get Mr. Umberg. We're a little thin on quorum today. Oh, he's here. Lisa? Thank you. Thanks. Okay, we'll reconvene. Members, I know we've gone through questions prior to... what's the pleasure of the board in terms of taking action today? Any comments or thoughts that members want to share, dialogue, discussion? Mr. Hartnett.
Yeah, I'm prepared to take action today on the 6 items that are in the recommendations. I thought that Mr. Flashman made an excellent point about, even if we have the legal justification to make a decision in a particular way, we still have to step back from that and say, well, what's the right decision beyond the fact that it's legal, and we may have more than one legally acceptable alternatives, and I read the materials and listened to the testimony and heard the staff report, and as this relates to the alternative question. I feel that there is a lot to commend both of the alternatives alignments, both the Altamont and the Pacheco, and so I think in that means you have to, from my perspective, you really have to look at it and say, okay, how do I balance the various considerations, and I'm not relying just on the document in terms of the staff recommendation is how to balance. I think it's, we get to rent our own balance, and in doing that, it just, frankly, with a lot to commend each, in my heart of hearts, I still think that Pacheco is the preferable alternative, and so there's a bunch of factors that go into it. They're addressed in the revised plan. And so that's just how I look on the alternative question and the choice of how that comes down. I think in terms of the technical issues of certifying, I think that the document adequately from a legal point of view addresses those things that the court required to be addressed, and so I'm comfortable with that. And I know the issue of the blended approach is a hot topic, obviously, and that's probably a closer call than some of the other issues. But, I think that it's been dealt with the best it can at the programmatic level, based upon the stage of where that is. And there's substantial more work that would have to be done on that at the second tier level, which is why I think in the recommendations there's the direction to both proceed with the second tier environmental planning and to direct the staff in that for the San Francisco to San Jose segment to focus on the blended system approach. And I think that's the appropriate place for that to land at this point. So those are my comments on, I think that really relates to all 6 of the action items that are subsumed within this particular agenda.
And I apologize, Mr. Hartnett, because I was looking at something. So in terms of action today, what were you proposing?
There was only 1 or 2 brilliant points you missed, but I feel I feel informed sufficiently based upon the documents and the testimony and the verbal staff report, as well as the conversations that we've had here in public. I feel informed sufficiently to be able to make a decision and to move on the 6 action items that are part of the recommendation.
Okay.
I personally do.
Other comments and so forth? I appreciate that, and I also feel we should move forward today. This is a difficult decision, obviously one that I say our predecessors, probably Director Umberg was part of this, have faced before. I wanted to make 2 quick points. First of all, in terms of the statement of overriding conditions that was offered up today, that was a red line document provided. It really was, those red line changes were really put in there with the purpose of reflecting some of the thinking and changes that came out of the 2012 revised business plan. There's 2 issues in my mind. One is the question of the network alternative, Pacheco versus Altamont, and the other is this issue that has been raised. And Mr. Hartnett, I want to just again thank you for your tremendous work on the blended system issue. Let me deal with that one first, very quickly, which is one of our speakers today, Ms. Hamilton, made a point that we've been talking about the blended system, but we're really not trusted, and that comes with the territory, I suppose. But I think that there's no question, if one looks at the range of decisions that this board has made over the past 6 or 7 months, that we do see the blended approach as as an appropriate way to build a high-speed rail system in California. The language that has been proposed today would indicate that as we go forward at the project level, not the program level, but at the project level, that we would be directing the staff to work, I believe the language says primarily on the blended approach. I would actually be amenable to a slight amendment of that to say exclusively on the blended approach, because I think that's really been the sense of of this board. So while I know that there are still some questions because we're not changing that part of the programmatic EIR, I do think we want to make it very clear that at the project level, that is the direction that we're giving to staff. It's also important to note that in adopting this language, we're not making a decision today with respect to that blended operation or blended system, but we are saying that as we move from the program level to the project level, staff is directed, and I would say, if my colleagues agree, to focus solely to use a word, on the blended approach in the peninsula. Which brings me to the issue of the Altamont versus Pacheco. This is very difficult for me because I've came to this board probably with some layperson's opinions about it. I've had to inform myself from the record over the last several months, and in the last week or so, inform myself more fully by reviewing these documents, which I have done. It's a lovely way to spend a Sunday afternoon. And, as I listened to the various speakers, I guess I am concerned that I would like to believe that we can handle the growth-inducing issues on a Pacheco route. I do understand that the Altamont route is alleged to have greater connectivity to other systems, but there may be some things as we go forward, particularly given our work with Caltrain and BART to San Jose and so forth, that I think can address some of those issues. And there may be other ways to deal with this. My biggest concern is just that we do have the problem with train splitting serving San Jose and the time requirements, and that's where I'm concerned that our mutual responsibilities of minimizing environmental impacts and also addressing the legal requirements of Prop 1A need to be harmonized. So I think that probably is the direction that we need to go based on the record that we've had before us and the testimony that we've had before us today. Any other members want to make any comments at this point? Motions? Council, let me just ask, in terms of the formalities, are there things that at this point, is it simply the motion, or how should we proceed?
What you have before you is a resolution, 12-17, and so that's what you would be adopting. But I just heard you, Mr. Chairman, indicate that you wanted to have a more direct, or not a preference, but a direction to staff more clearly that we move to the blended system approach. So I have the resolution here, and I'd just like to come up and may I approach the bench and give this to you so that you can see the exact language and maybe suggest language changes.
Right. I'm sorry, so I lost my place in my book. Right. Right, so members, right now this reads, the authority further directs staff that a second-tier project-level EIR for the San Francisco to San Jose section of the high-speed train system shall be focused on a blended system approach. I would propose adding the word solely, S-O-L-E-Y, after the word focused. Mr. Hartnett, is that, are you comfortable or uncomfortable with that?
Well, as long as it's passes the legal muster, I'm comfortable with that. I think it's a good word to add.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be fine. You could add that word. There wouldn't be any legal problem.
Okay. All right. With that, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the resolution as stated with the one-word amendment that was just inserted, and including as we the revised statement of overriding considerations in the addendum to the partially revised final program EIR that we have as part of our packet as well.
Second that, Mr. Chair.
It's been moved by Mr. Hartnett, seconded by Vice Chair Richards. Secretary, please call the roll.
Vice Chair Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Umberg?
Aye.
Mr. Hartnett?
Yes.
Mr. Balganard?
Yes.
Chairman Richard?
Yes. I want to thank Mr. Falens and all the staff that we heard from today, Mr. Freitag and other members of the staff. I want to thank our attorney support team from the Attorney General's office who's helped us with this. And the last point I want to make on this is that The High-Speed Rail Authority is very interested in doing the environmental work in the right way. I think it should be noted that when the judge's preliminary ruling came out, we did not wait for a final ruling. We did not appeal that. We began immediately to try to remediate the deficiencies that were identified in the environmental documents. And a lot of people worked very hard over the holiday season to deal with that. And I want to express gratitude, I'm sure, on behalf of all my colleagues on the board. So thank you for that. Members of the public, thank you for your